Section 2 of The Girl with the Golden Eyes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Girl with the Golden Eyes by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. Section 2. Upon one of those fine spring mornings, when the leaves, although unfolded, are not yet green, when the sun begins to gild the roofs, and the sky is blue, when the population of Paris issues from its cells to swarm along the boulevard, glides like a serpent of 1,000 coils through the Rue de la Paix towards the Tuileries, saluting the hymeneal magnificence which the country puts on. On one of those joyous days, then, a young man as beautiful as the day itself, dressed with taste, easy of manner. To let out the secret, he was a love child, the natural son of Lord Dudley and the famous Marquise de Vordac, was walking in the great avenue of the Tuileries. This Adonis, by name Henri de Marsay, was born in France, when Lord Dudley had just married the young lady, already Henri's mother, to an old gentleman called Monsieur de Marsay. This faded and almost extinguished butterfly recognized the child as his own in consideration of the life interest in a fund of 100,000 francs, definitively assigned to his putative son. A generosity which did not cost Lord Dudley too dear. French funds were worth at that time 17 francs 50 centimes. The old gentleman died without having ever known his wife. Madame de Marsay subsequently married the Marquis de Vordac, but before becoming a marquise, she showed very little anxiety as to her son and Lord Dudley. To begin with, the declaration of war between France and England had separated the two lovers, and fidelity at all costs was not, and never will be, the fashion of Paris. Then the successes of the woman, elegant, pretty, universally adored, crushed in the Parisienne the maternal sentiment. Lord Dudley was no more troubled about his offspring than was the mother. The speedy infidelity of a young girl he had ardently loved gave him, perhaps, a sort of aversion for all that issued from her. Moreover, fathers can, perhaps, only love the children with whom they are fully acquainted. A social belief of the utmost importance for the peace of families, which should be held by all the celibate, proving as it does that paternity is a sentiment nourished artificially by woman, custom, and the law. Poor Henri de Marsay knew no other father than that one of the two who was not compelled to be one. The paternity of Monsieur de Marsay was naturally most incomplete. In the natural order, it is but for a few fleeting instants that children have a father, and Monsieur de Marsay imitated nature. The worthy man would not have sold his name had he been free from vices. Thus he squandered without remorse in gambling hells, and drank elsewhere the few dividends which the national treasury paid to its bondholders. Then he handed over the child to an aged sister, a demoiselle de Marsay, who took much care of him, and provided him, out of the meagre sum allowed by her brother, with a tutor, an abbe without a farthing, who took the measure of the youth's future, and determined to pay himself out of the 100,000 livres for the care given to his pupil, for whom he conceived an affection. As chance had it, this tutor was a true priest, one of those ecclesiastics cut out to become cardinals in France, or Borgias beneath the tiara. He taught the child in 3 years what he might have learned at college in 10. Then the great man, by the name the Abbe de Maronis, completed the education of his pupil by making him study civilization under all its aspects. He nourished him on his experience, led him little into churches, which at that time were closed, introduced him sometimes behind the scenes of theatres, more often into the houses of courtesans. He exhibited human emotions to him one by one, taught him politics in the drawing rooms where they simmered at the time, explained to him the machinery of government, and endeavored out of attraction towards a fine nature, deserted yet rich in promise, virilely to replace a mother. Is not the church the mother of orphans? The pupil was responsive to so much care. The worthy priest died in 1812, a bishop, with the satisfaction of having left in this world a child whose heart and mind were so well moulded that he could outwit a man of 40. Who would have expected to have found a heart of bronze, a brain of steel, beneath external traits, as seductive as ever the old painters, those naive artists, had given to the serpent in the terrestrial paradise? Nor was that all. In addition, the good-natured prelate had procured for the child of his choice certain acquaintances in the best Parisian society, which might equal in value, in the young man's hand, another 100,000 invested livres. In fine, this priest, vicious but politic, skeptical yet learned, treacherous yet amiable, weak in appearance, yet as vigorous physically as intellectually, was so genuinely useful to his pupil, so complacent to his vices, so fine a calculator of all kinds of strength, so profound when it was needful to make some human reckoning, so youthful at table, at Frascati, at I know not where, that the grateful Henri de Marsay was hardly moved at aught in 1814, except when he looked at the portrait of his beloved bishop, the only personal possession which the prelate had been able to bequeath him. Admirable type of the men whose genius will preserve the Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman Church, compromised for the moment by the feebleness of its recruits and the decrepit age of its pontiffs. But if the Church likes. The Continental War prevented young de Marsay from knowing his real father. It is doubtful whether he was aware of his name. A deserted child, he was equally ignorant of Madame de Marsay. Naturally, he had little regret for his putative father. As for Mademoiselle de Marsay, his only mother, he built for her a handsome little monument in Père Lachaise when she died. Monseigneur de Maronis had guaranteed to this old lady one of the best places in the skies, so that when he saw her die happy, Henri gave her some egotistical tears. He began to weep on his own account. Observing this grief, the abbe dried his pupil's tears, bidding him observe that the good woman took her snuff most offensively, and was becoming so ugly and deaf and tedious that he ought to return thanks for her death. The bishop had emancipated his pupil in 1811. Then, when the mother of M. de Marsay remarried, the priest chose in a family council one of those honest dullards, picked out by him through the windows of the confessional, and charged him with the administration of the fortune, the revenues of which he was willing to apply to the needs of the community, but of which he wished to preserve the capital. Towards the end of 1814, then, Henri de Marsay had no sentiment of obligation in the world, and was as free as an unmated bird. Although he had lived 22 years, he appeared to be barely 17. As a rule, the most fastidious of his rivals considered him to be the prettiest youth in Paris. From his father, Lord Dudley, he had derived a pair of the most amorously deceiving blue eyes; from his mother, the bushiest of black hair; from both, pure blood, the skin of a young girl, a gentle and modest expression, a refined and aristocratic figure, and beautiful hands. For a woman, to see him was to lose her head for him. Do you understand? To conceive one of those desires which eat the heart, which are forgotten because of the impossibility of satisfying them, because women in Paris are commonly without tenacity. Few of them say to themselves, after the fashion of men, the je maintiendrai of the House of Orange. Underneath this fresh young life, and in spite of the limpid springs in his eyes, Henri had a lion's courage, a monkey's agility. He could cut a ball in half at 10 paces on the blade of a knife. He rode his horse in a way that made you realize the fable of the centaur, drove a 4-in-hand with grace, was as light as a cherub and quiet as a lamb, but knew how to beat a townsman at the terrible game of savate or cudgels. Moreover, he played the piano in a fashion which would have enabled him to become an artist should he fall on calamity, and owned a voice which would have been worth to Barbaia 50,000 francs a season. Alas, that all these fine qualities, these pretty faults, were tarnished by one abominable vice. He believed neither in man nor woman, God nor devil. Capricious nature had commenced by endowing him, a priest had completed the work. To render this adventure comprehensible, it is necessary to add here that Lord Dudley naturally found many women disposed to reproduce samples of such a delicious pattern. His second masterpiece of this kind was a young girl named Euphémie, born of a Spanish lady reared in Havana, and brought to Madrid with a young Creole woman of the Antilles, and with all the ruinous tastes of the colonies, but fortunately married to an old and extremely rich Spanish noble, Don Hijos, Marquis de San Real, who, since the occupation of Spain by French troops, had taken up his abode in Paris, and lived in the Rue Saint Lazare. As much from indifference as from any respect for the innocence of youth, Lord Dudley was not in the habit of keeping his children informed of the relations he created for them in all parts. That is a slightly inconvenient form of civilization. It has so many advantages that we must overlook its drawbacks in consideration of its benefits. Lord Dudley, to make no more words of it, came to Paris in 1816 to take refuge from the pursuit of English justice, which protects nothing oriental except commerce. The exiled lord, when he saw Henri, asked who that handsome young man might be. Then, upon hearing the name, "Ah, it is my son. What a pity," he said. Such was the story of the young man who, about the middle of the month of April, 1815, was walking indolently up the broad avenue of the Tuileries, after the fashion of all those animals who, knowing their strength, pass along in majesty and peace. Middle class matrons turned back naively to look at him again. Other women, without turning round, waited for him to pass again, and engraved him in their minds that they might remember in due season that fragrant face, which would not have disadorned the body of the fairest among themselves. "What are you doing here on Sunday?" said the Marquis de Ronquerolles to Henri as he passed. "There's a fish in the net," answered the young man. This exchange of thoughts was accomplished by means of two significant glances, without it appearing that either de Ronquerolles or de Marsay had any knowledge of the other. The young man was taking note of the passers by with that promptitude of eye and ear which is peculiar to the Parisian, who seems at first to see and hear nothing, but who sees and hears all. At that moment, a young man came up to him and took him familiarly by the arm, saying to him, "How are you, my dear de Marsay?" "Extremely well," de Marsay answered, with that air of apparent affection which, amongst the young men of Paris, proves nothing, either for the present or the future. In effect, the youth of Paris resemble the youth of no other town. They may be divided into two classes: the young man who has something, and the young man who has nothing; or the young man who thinks, and he who spends. But, be it well understood, this applies only to those natives of the soil who maintain in Paris the delicious course of the elegant life. There exist as well plenty of other young men, but they are children who are late in conceiving Parisian life, and who remain its dupes. They do not speculate, they study, they fag, as the others say. Finally, there are to be found besides certain young people, rich or poor, who embrace careers and follow them with a single heart. They are somewhat like the Emile of Rousseau, of the flesh of citizens, and they never appear in society. The diplomatic impolitely dub them fools. Be they that or no, they augment the number of those mediocrities beneath the yoke of which France is bowed down. They are always there, always ready to bungle public or private concerns with the dull trowel of their mediocrity, bragging of their impotence, which they count for conduct and integrity. This sort of social prizemen infests the administration, the army, the magistracy, the chambers, the courts. They diminish and level down the country, and constitute in some manner, in the body politic, a lymph which infects it and renders it flabby. These honest folk call men of talent immoral or rogues. If such rogues require to be paid for their services, at least their services are there, whereas the other sort do harm, and are respected by the mob, but happily for France, elegant youth stigmatizes them ceaselessly under the name of louts. At the first glance, then, it is natural to consider as very distinct the two sorts of young men who lead the life of elegance, the amiable corporation to which Henri de Marsay belonged. But the observer who goes beyond the superficial aspect of things is soon convinced that the difference is purely moral, and that nothing is so deceptive as this pretty outside. Nevertheless, all alike take precedence over everybody else, speak rightly or wrongly of things, of men, literature, and the fine arts, have ever in their mouth the pit and Cobourg of each year, interrupt a conversation with a pun, turn into ridicule science and the savant, despise all things which they do not know or which they fear, set themselves above all by constituting themselves the supreme judges of all. They would all hoax their fathers and be ready to shed crocodile tears upon their mothers' breasts. But generally they believe in nothing, blaspheme women, or play at modesty, and in reality are led by some old woman or an evil courtesan. They are all equally eaten to the bone with calculation, with depravity, with a brutal lust to succeed, and if you plumbed for their hearts, you would find in all a stone. In their normal state they have the prettiest exterior, stake their friendship at every turn, are captivating alike. The same badinage dominates their ever-changing jargon. They seek for oddity in their toilette, glory in repeating the stupidities of such and such actor who is in fashion, and commence operations, it matters not with whom, with contempt and impertinence, in order to have, as it were, the first move in the game. But woe betide him who does not know how to take a blow on one cheek, for the sake of rendering two. They resemble, in fine, that pretty white spray which crests the stormy waves. They dress and dance, dine and take their pleasure on the day of Waterloo, in the time of cholera or revolution. Finally, their expenses are all the same, but here the contrast comes in. Of this fluctuating fortune, so agreeably flung away, some possess the capital for which the others wait. They have the same tailors, but the bills of the latter are still to pay. Next, if the first, like sieves, take in ideas of all kinds without retaining any, the latter compare them and assimilate all the good. If the first believe they know something, know nothing and understand everything, lend all to those who need nothing, and offer nothing to those who are in need, the latter study secretly others' thoughts, and place out their money, like their follies, at big interest. The one class have no more faithful impressions, because their soul, like a mirror worn from use, no longer reflects any image. The others economize their senses and life, even while they seem, like the first, to be flinging them away broadcast. The first, on the faith of a hope, devote themselves without conviction to a system which has wind and tide against it, but they leap upon another political craft when the first goes adrift. The second take the measure of the future, sound it, and see in political fidelity what the English see in commercial integrity, an element of success. Where the young man of possessions makes a pun or an epigram upon the restoration of the throne, he who has nothing makes a public calculation or a secret reservation, and obtains everything by giving a handshake to his friends. The one deny every faculty to others, look upon all their ideas as new, as though the world had been made yesterday. They have unlimited confidence in themselves, and no crueller enemy than those same selves. But the others are armed with an incessant distrust of men, whom they estimate at their value, and are sufficiently profound to have one thought beyond their friends, whom they exploit. Then of evenings, when they lay their heads on their pillows, they weigh men as a miser weighs his gold pieces. The one are vexed at aimless impertinence, and allow themselves to be ridiculed by the diplomatic, who make them dance for them by pulling what is the main string of these puppets, their vanity. Thus a day comes when those who had nothing have something, and those who had something have nothing. The latter look at their comrades who have achieved positions as cunning fellows. Their hearts may be bad, but their heads are strong. "He is very strong," is the supreme praise accorded to those who have attained quibuscumque viis, political rank, a woman or a fortune. Amongst them are to be found certain young men who play this role by commencing with having debts. Naturally, these are more dangerous than those who play it without a farthing. Section 3. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey. Of the Girl with the Golden Eyes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Girl with the Golden Eyes by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. Section 3. The young man who called himself a friend of Henri de Marsay was a rattlehead who had come from the provinces, and whom the young men then in fashion were teaching the art of running through an inheritance. But he had one last leg to stand on in his province, in the shape of a secure establishment. He was simply an heir who had passed without any transition from the pittance of 100 francs a month to the entire paternal fortune, and who, if he had not wit enough to perceive that he was laughed at, was sufficiently cautious to stop short at 2/3 of his capital. He had learned at Paris, for a consideration of some thousands of francs, the exact value of harness, the art of not being too respectful to his gloves, learned to make skillful meditations upon the right wages to give people, and to seek out what bargain was the best to close with them. He set store on his capacity to speak in good terms of his horses, of his Pyrenean hound, to tell by her dress, her walk, her shoes, to what class a woman belonged, to study écarté, remember a few fashionable catchwords, and win by his sojourn in Parisian society the necessary authority to import later into his province a taste for tea and silver of an English fashion, and to obtain the right of despising everything around him for the rest of his days. De Marsay had admitted him to his society in order to make use of him in the world, just as a bold speculator employs a confidential clerk. The friendship, real or feigned, of de Marsay was a social position for Paul de Manerville, who on his side thought himself astute in exploiting after his fashion his intimate friend. He lived in the reflecting lustre of his friend, walked constantly under his umbrella, wore his boots, gilded himself with his rays. When he posed in Henri's company or walked at his side, he had the air of saying, "Don't insult us, we are real dogs." He often permitted himself to remark fatuously, "If I were to ask Henri for such and such a thing, he is a good enough friend of mine to do it." But he was careful never to ask anything of him. He feared him, and his fear, although imperceptible, reacted upon the others and was of use to de Marsay. "De Marsay is a man of 1,000," said Paul. "Ah, you will see, he will be what he likes. I should not be surprised to find him one of these days Minister of Foreign Affairs. Nothing can withstand him." He made of de Marsay what Corporal Trim made of his cap, a perpetual instance. "Ask de Marsay and you will see." Or again, "The other day we were hunting, de Marsay and I. He would not believe me, but I jumped a hedge without moving on my horse." Or again, we were with some women, De Marsay and I, and upon my word of honor, I was, etc. Thus Paul de Manerville could not be classed among the great, illustrious, and powerful family of fools who succeed. He would one day be a deputy. For the time he was not even a young man. His friend De Marsay defined him thus: "You ask me what is Paul? Paul? Why, Paul de Manerville." "I am surprised, my dear fellow," he said to De Marsay, "to see you here on a Sunday." "I was going to ask you the same question." "Is it an intrigue?" "An intrigue! Bah! I can mention it to you without compromising my passion. Besides, a woman who comes to the Tuileries on Sundays is of no account, aristocratically speaking." "Hold your tongue then, or I shall tell you nothing. Your laugh is too loud, you will make people think that we have lunched too well. Last Thursday, here on the Terrasse des Feuillants, I was walking along, thinking of nothing at all, but when I got to the gate of the Rue de Castiglione, by which I intended to leave, I came face to face with a woman, or rather a young girl, who, if she did not throw herself at my head, stopped short less, I think, from human respect than from one of those movements of profound surprise which affect the limbs, creep down the length of the spine, and cease only in the sole of the feet, to nail you to the ground. I have often produced effects of this nature, a sort of animal magnetism, which becomes enormously powerful when the relations are reciprocally precise. But, my dear fellow, this was not stupefaction, nor was she a common girl. Morally speaking, her face seemed to say, 'What, is it you, my ideal, the creation of my thoughts, of my morning and evening dreams? What, are you there? Why this morning? Why not yesterday? Take me, I am thine,' etc. Good, I said to myself, another one. Then I scrutinize her. Ah, my dear fellow, speaking physically, my incognita is the most adorable feminine person whom I ever met. She belongs to that feminine variety which the Romans call fulva flava, the woman of fire. And in chief, what struck me the most, what I am still taken with, are her two yellow eyes, like a tiger's, a golden yellow that gleams, living gold, gold which thinks, gold which loves, and is determined to take refuge in your pocket." "My dear fellow, we are full of her," cried Paul. "She comes here sometimes, the girl with the golden eyes. That is the name we have given her. She is a young creature, not more than 22, and I have seen her here in the time of the Bourbons, but with a woman who was worth 100,000 of her." "Silence, Paul. It is impossible for any woman to surpass this girl. She is like the cat who rubs herself against your legs, a white girl with ash colored hair, delicate in appearance, but who must have downy threads on the third phalanx of her fingers, and all along her cheeks a white down, whose line, luminous on fine days, begins at her ears and loses itself on her neck. Ah, the other, my dear de Marsay, she has black eyes which have never wept, but which burn, black eyebrows which meet and give her an air of hardness, contradicted by the compact curve of her lips, on which the kisses do not stay, lips burning and fresh, a Moorish colour that warms a man like the sun. But upon my word of honour, she is like you. You flatter her. A firm figure, the tapering figure of a corvette built for speed, which rushes down upon the merchant vessel with French impetuosity, which grapples with her and sinks her at the same time. After all, my dear fellow, answered de Marsay, what has that got to do with me, since I have never seen her? Ever since I have studied women, my incognita is the only one whose virginal bosom, whose ardent and voluptuous forms, have realized for me the only woman of my dreams. Of my dreams. She is the original of that ravishing picture called La Femme caressant sa chimère, the warmest, the most infernal inspiration of the genius of antiquity, a holy poem prostituted by those who have copied it for frescoes and mosaics, for a heap of bourgeois who see in this gem nothing more than a gewgaw, and hang it on their watch chains, whereas it is the whole woman, an abyss of pleasure into which one plunges and finds no end, whereas it is the ideal woman, to be seen sometimes in reality in Spain or Italy, almost never in France. Well, I have again seen this girl of the gold eyes, this woman caressing her chimera. I saw her on Friday. I had a presentiment that on the following day she would be here at the same hour. I was not mistaken. I have taken a pleasure in following her without being observed, in studying her indolent walk, the walk of the woman without occupation, but in the movements of which one divines all the pleasure that lies asleep. Well, she turned back again, she saw me, once more she adored me, once more trembled, shivered. It was then I noticed the genuine Spanish duenna who looked after her, a hyena upon whom some jealous man has put a dress, a she-devil well paid, no doubt, to guard this delicious creature. Ah, then the duenna made me deeper in love. I grew curious. On Saturday, nobody. And here I am to day, waiting for this girl whose chimera I am, asking nothing better than to pose as the monster in the fresco. There she is, said Paul. Everyone is turning round to look at her. The unknown blushed, her eyes shone. She saw Henri, she shut them and passed by. You say that she notices you, cried Paul facetiously. The duenna looked fixedly and attentively at the two young men. When the unknown and Henri passed each other again, the young girl touched him, and with her hand pressed the hand of the young man. Then she turned her head and smiled with passion. But the duenna led her away very quickly to the gate of the Rue de Castiglione. The two friends followed the young girl, admiring the magnificent grace of the neck which met her head in a harmony of vigorous lines, and upon which a few coils of hair were tightly wound. The girl with the golden eyes had that well-knitted, arched, slender foot which presents so many attractions to the dainty imagination. Moreover, she was shod with elegance and wore a short skirt. During her course, she turned from time to time to look at Henri, and appeared to follow the old woman regretfully, seeming to be at once her mistress and her slave. She could break her with blows, but could not dismiss her. All that was perceptible. The two friends reached the gate. Two men in livery let down the step of a tasteful coupe, emblazoned with armorial bearings. The girl with the golden eyes was the first to enter it, took her seat at the side where she could be best seen when the carriage turned, put her hand on the door, and waved her handkerchief in the duenna's despite. In contempt of what might be said by the curious, the handkerchief cried to Henri openly, "Follow me." "Have you ever seen a handkerchief better thrown?" said Henri to Paul de Manerville. Then, observing a fiacre on the point of departure, having just set down a fare, he made a sign to the driver to wait. "Follow that carriage, notice the house and the street where it stops. You shall have 10 francs. Paul, adieu." The cab followed the coupe. The coupe stopped in the Rue Saint-Lazare, before one of the finest houses of the neighborhood. End of section 3. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey. Of the Girl with the Golden Eyes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Girl with the Golden Eyes by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. Section 4. De Marsay was not impulsive. Any other young man would have obeyed his impulse to obtain at once some information about a girl who realized so fully the most luminous ideas ever expressed upon women in the poetry of the East. But too experienced to compromise his good fortune, he had told his coachman to continue along the Rue Saint-Lazare and carry him back to his house. The next day, his confidential valet, Laurent by name, as cunning a fellow as the Frontin of the old comedy, waited in the vicinity of the house inhabited by the unknown for the hour at which letters were distributed. In order to be able to spy at his ease and hang about the house, he had followed the example of those police officers who seek a good disguise, and bought up cast-off clothes of an Auvergnat, the appearance of whom he sought to imitate. When the postman who went the round of the Rue Saint Lazare that morning passed by, Laurent feigned to be a porter unable to remember the name of a person to whom he had to deliver a parcel, and consulted the postman. Deceived at first by appearances, this personage, so picturesque in the midst of Parisian civilization, informed him that the house in which the girl with the golden eyes dwelt belonged to Don Hijos, Marquis de San Real, grandee of Spain. Naturally, it was not with the Marquis that the Auvergnat was concerned. "My parcel," he said, "is for the Marquise." "She is away," replied the postman. "Her letters are forwarded to London." "Then the Marquise is not a young girl who—" "Ha!" said the postman, interrupting the valet de chambre and observing him attentively. "You are as much a porter as I'm." Laurent chinked some pieces of gold before the functionary, who began to smile. "Come, here's the name of your quarry," he said, taking from his leather wallet a letter bearing a London stamp, upon which the address to Mademoiselle Paquita Valdes, Rue Saint Lazare, Hotel San Real, Paris, was written in long, fine characters, which spoke of a woman's hand. "Could you tap a bottle of Chablis, with a few dozen oysters and a filet sauté with mushrooms to follow it?" said Laurent, who wished to win the postman's valuable friendship. "At 9:30, when my round is finished." "Where?" "At the corner of the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin and the Rue Neuve des Mathurins, at the Puy Sans Vin," said Laurent. "Hark ye, my friend," said the postman, when he rejoined the valet an hour after this encounter, "if your master is in love with the girl, he's in for a famous task. I doubt you'll not succeed in seeing her. In the 10 years that I've been postman in Paris, I have seen plenty of different kinds of doors, but I can tell you, and no fear of being called a liar by any of my comrades, there never was a door so mysterious as Monsieur de Saint Real's. No one can get into the house without the Lord knows what counterword. And notice, it has been selected on purpose between a courtyard and a garden, to avoid any communication with other houses. The porter is an old Spaniard who never speaks a word of French, but peers at people as Vidocq might, to see if they are not thieves. If a lover, a thief, or you, I make no comparisons, could get the better of this first wicket, well, in the first hall, which is shut by a glazed door, you would run across a butler surrounded by lackeys, an old joker more savage and surly even than the porter. If anyone gets past the porter's lodge, my butler comes out, waits for you at the entrance, and puts you through a cross-examination like a criminal. That has happened to me, a mere postman. He took me for an eavesdropper in disguise, he said, laughing at his nonsense. As for the servants, don't hope to get aught out of them. I think they are mutes. No one in the neighborhood knows the color of their speech. I don't know what wages they can pay them to keep them from talk and drink. The fact is, they are not to be got at, whether because they are afraid of being shot, or that they have some enormous sum to lose in the case of an indiscretion. If your master is fond enough of Mademoiselle Paquita Valdes to surmount all these obstacles, he certainly won't triumph over Dona Concha Marialva, the duenna who accompanies her, and would put her under her petticoats sooner than leave her. The two women look as if they were sewn to one another." "All that you say, worthy postman," went on Laurent, after having drunk off his wine, "confirms me in what I have learned before. Upon my word, I thought they were making fun of me. The fruiterer opposite told me that of nights they let loose dogs whose food is hung up on stakes just out of their reach. These cursed animals think, therefore, that any one likely to come in has designs on their victuals, and would tear one to pieces. You will tell me one might throw them down pieces, but it seems they have been trained to touch nothing except from the hand of the porter." "The porter of the Baron de Nucingen, whose garden joins at the top that of the Hotel San Real, told me the same thing," replied the postman. "Good, my master knows him," said Laurent to himself. "Do you know," he went on, leering at the postman, "I serve a master who is a rare man, and if he took it into his head to kiss the sole of the foot of an empress, she would have to give in to him. If he had need of you, which is what I wish for you, for he is generous, could one count on you?" "Lord, Monsieur Laurent, my name is Moinot. My name is written exactly like moineau, magpie, Moinot, Moinot." "Exactly," said Laurent. "I live at number 11, Rue des Trois Freres, on the 5th floor," went on Moinot. "I have a wife and 4 children. If what you want of me doesn't transgress the limits of my conscience and my official duties, you understand, I am your man." "You are an honest fellow," said Laurent, shaking his hand. Paquita Valdes is no doubt the mistress of the Marquis de San Real, the friend of King Ferdinand. Only an old Spanish mummy of 80 years is capable of taking such precautions, said Henri, when his valet de chambre had related the result of his researches. "Monsieur," said Laurent, "unless he takes a balloon, no one can get into that hotel. You are a fool. Is it necessary to get into the hotel to have Paquita, when Paquita can get out of it? But, sir, the duenna—" "We will shut her up for a day or two, your duenna." "So we shall have Paquita," said Laurent, rubbing his hands. "Rascal!" answered Henri. "I shall condemn you to the concha if you carry your impudence so far as to speak so of a woman before she has become mine. Turn your thoughts to dressing me. I am going out." Henri remained for a moment plunged in joyous reflections. Let us say it to the praise of women, he obtained all those whom he deigned to desire. And what could one think of a woman having no lover, who should have known how to resist a young man armed with beauty, which is the intelligence of the body, with intelligence, which is a grace of the soul, armed with moral force and fortune, which are the only two real powers? Yet, in triumphing with such ease, De Marsay was bound to grow weary of his triumphs. Thus, for about 2 years, he had grown very weary indeed. And diving deep into the sea of pleasures, he brought back more grit than pearls. Thus had he come, like potentates, to implore of chance some obstacle to surmount, some enterprise which should ask the employment of his dormant moral and physical strength. Although Paquita Valdes presented him with a marvelous concentration of perfections which he had only yet enjoyed in detail, the attraction of passion was almost nil with him. Constant satiety had weakened in his heart the sentiment of love. Like old men and people disillusioned, he had no longer anything but extravagant caprices, ruinous tastes, fantasies, which, once satisfied, left no pleasant memory in his heart. Amongst young people, love is the finest of the emotions, it makes the life of the soul blossom. It nourishes by its solar power the finest inspirations and their great thoughts. The first fruits in all things have a delicious savor. Amongst men, love becomes a passion. Strength leads to abuse. Amongst old men it turns to vice. Impotence tends to extremes. Henri was at once an old man, a man, and a youth. To afford him the feelings of a real love, he needed, like Lovelace, a Clarissa Harlowe. Without the magic lustre of that unattainable pearl, he could only have either passions rendered acute by some Parisian vanity, or set determinations with himself to bring such and such a woman to such and such a point of corruption, or else adventures which stimulated his curiosity. The report of Laurent, his valet de chambre, had just given an enormous value to the girl with the golden eyes. It was a question of doing battle with some secret enemy who seemed as dangerous as he was cunning, and to carry off the victory, all the forces which Henri could dispose of would be useful. He was about to play in that eternal old comedy which will be always fresh, and the characters in which are an old man, a young girl, and a lover. Don Hijos, Paquita, de Marsay. If Laurent was the equal of Figaro, the duenna seemed incorruptible. Thus the living play was supplied by chance with a stronger plot than it had ever been by dramatic author. But then is not chance too a man of genius? It must be a cautious game, said Henri to himself. Well, said Paul de Manerville as he entered the room, how are we getting on? I have come to breakfast with you. So be it, said Henri. You won't be shocked if I make my toilette before you. How absurd! We take so many things from the English just now that we might well become as great prudes and hypocrites as themselves, said Henri. Laurent had set before his master such a quantity of utensils, so many different articles of such elegance, that Paul could not refrain from saying, "But you will take a couple of hours over that." "No," said Henri, 2 hours and a half. "Well, then, since we are by ourselves and can say what we like, explain to me why a man as superior as yourself, for you are superior, should affect to exaggerate a foppery which cannot be natural. Why spend 2 hours and a half in adorning yourself, when it is sufficient to spend 1/4 of an hour in your bath, to do your hair in 2 minutes, and to dress? There, tell me your system. I must be very fond of you, my good dunce, to confide such high thoughts to you, said the young man, who was at that moment having his feet rubbed with a soft brush lathered with English soap. "Have I not the most devoted attachment to you?" replied Paul de Manerville. "And do I not like you because I know your superiority? You must have noticed, if you are in the least capable of observing any moral fact, that women love fops," went on de Marsay, without replying in any way to Paul's declaration except by a look. "Do you know why women love fops? My friend, fops are the only men who take care of themselves. Now, to take excessive care of oneself, does it not imply that one takes care in oneself of what belongs to another? The man who does not belong to himself is precisely the man on whom women are keen. Love is essentially a thief. I say nothing about that excess of niceness to which they are so devoted. Do you know of any woman who has had a passion for a sloven, even if he were a remarkable man? If such a fact has occurred, we must put it to the account of those morbid affections of the breeding woman, mad fancies which float through the minds of everybody. On the other hand, I have seen most remarkable people left in the lurch because of their carelessness. A fop, who is concerned about his person, is concerned with folly, with petty things. And what is a woman? A petty thing, a bundle of follies. With 2 words said to the winds, can you not make her busy for 4 hours? She is sure that the fop will be occupied with her, seeing that he has no mind for great things. She will never be neglected for glory, ambition, politics, art, those prostitutes who for her are rivals. Then fops have the courage to cover themselves with ridicule in order to please a woman, and her heart is full of gratitude towards the man who is ridiculous for love. In fine, a fop can be no fop unless he is right in being one. It is women who bestow that rank. The fop is love's colonel. He has his victories, his regiment of women at his command. My dear fellow, in Paris everything is known, and a man cannot be a fop there gratis. You, who have only one woman, and who perhaps are right to have but one, try to act the fop. You will not even become ridiculous, you will be dead. You will become a foregone conclusion, one of those men condemned inevitably to do one and the same thing. You will come to signify folly as inseparably as M. de Lafayette signifies America, M. de Talleyrand diplomacy, Desaugiers song, M. de Ségur romance. If they once forsake their own line, people no longer attach any value to what they do. So foppery, my friend Paul, is the sign of an incontestable power over the female folk. A man who is loved by many women passes for having superior qualities. And then, poor fellow, it is a question who shall have him. But do you think it is nothing to have the right of going into a drawing room, of looking down at people from over your cravat, or through your eyeglass, and of despising the most superior of men, should he wear an old fashioned waistcoat. Laurent, you are hurting me. After breakfast, Paul, we will go to the Tuileries and see the adorable girl with the golden eyes. End of Section 4. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.